Pope Leo XIV stopped the blessing with his hand less than an inch above the golden tabernacle. The choir was still holding its final note when an 82-year-old widow rose from the second row and whispered, "That is my husband's ring." No one was supposed to hear her, but the Pope did. Wealthy bishops stood near the altar as cameras faced the new tabernacle, the centerpiece of a campaign called Golden Mercy. Catholics had donated wedding bands, medals, and family crosses. The fund claimed the gifts had produced nearly $15 million for hospices, parish kitchens, and homes for abandoned seniors. The blessing was due to begin in 8 minutes. Then Margaret Hale saw a familiar dent in a ring resting on a small velvet tray beside the tabernacle. She moved into the aisle, gripping the back of each pew to steady herself. A guard reached for her elbow. Bishop Raymond Kessler stepped between her and the altar. "Mrs. Hale, please remain seated. The objects on that tray are ceremonial samples." Margaret looked at him as if she had not understood. "My husband made that dent changing a tire in Ohio," she said. "He wore it for 56 years. Kessler lowered his voice. "Grief can attach itself to familiar shapes." Margaret gripped the black ribbon, holding her own wedding band. She had kept one ring and donated Thomas's after he died. Pope Leo XIV stepped down from the altar. "Bring the tray to her." Kessler did not move. "The broadcast is about to begin, Holy Father. Bring it to her." The guard carried the velvet tray into the aisle. Margaret did not touch the ring. She only leaned close enough to read the engraving inside. "Until we meet again. Thomas." Her knees weakened. The Pope caught her before she struck the pew. For one terrible second, Margaret tried to apologize. "I did not mean to stop anything." "You did not stop it," Pope Leo XIV said. "The truth did." He turned toward the bishops. The record said Margaret's ring had been melted 11 months earlier. Kessler's signature certified that its gold was inside the tabernacle. The Pope asked the simplest question in the room. "If the ring was melted, why is it here?" No bishop answered. Archbishop Lucio Valenti, chairman of Golden Mercy, finally stepped forward. He was calm, silver-haired, and known for never raising his voice. "There are thousands of donations. A labeling error is possible." Pope Leo looked at the tabernacle. "Then we will correct the error before we bless it." Valenti's expression changed. "Holy Father, this event is being transmitted internationally." "Then the correction should be visible internationally." The Pope ordered the cameras to remain on and called the metals conservator. The man tested the lower panel twice. His thumb began to tremble. The tabernacle was not solid gold. It was brass covered with a thin layer of gold leaf. The choir director lowered both hands. One of the altar boys forgot to set down the bell. Valenti said there had to be a manufacturing substitution. Pope Leo XIV looked again at Margaret's ring. "No," he said quietly. There had to be a decision. At midnight, the remaining donor gold was scheduled to leave a secured Vatican warehouse for what the Foundation described as final processing. The Pope glanced at the clock above the side entrance. There were less than 12 hours before the truck departed. He gave one order: seal the warehouse. No gold leaves tonight. And for the first time, Bishop Kessler looked frightened. The bishops were moved into a private chamber, but Pope Leo XIV refused to send Margaret away. "I have been quiet since Thomas died," she said. The Pope placed a chair beside his own. Archbishop Valenti opened a leather folder. His explanation was clean, careful, and almost comforting. Golden Mercy had received more heirlooms than expected. Some were preserved, others were sold, with the money moved through partner organizations. The gifts were handled according to procedure, he said. That became his defense. According to procedure. The Pope asked how many hospices had been completed. Valenti said 7. "How many are open?" A pause followed. 3 are in final preparation. How many have patients inside them today? No one answered. The first report arrived before noon. One Pennsylvania hospice was an empty field. Another address belonged to a closed furniture store. A parish kitchen listed at $900,000 had received less than $40,000. Yet nearly 2 million had purchased a seaside residence for senior church officials. The contrast was so plain that no accountant was needed to understand it. A widow's ring had vanished into a system that could find money for marble floors, but not soup. If Pope Leo XIV's refusal to ignore that widow reminds you what a true shepherd should be, write "mercy" in the comments so people like Margaret are not forgotten. The Pope did not speak to the cameras again. He left the ceremonial chamber and went to the warehouse himself. Valenti asked to accompany him. Pope Leo said no. He took only Margaret, a lay auditor named Helen Brooks, Father Daniel Mercer, and Sister Elena Valli, a 74-year-old nun who had once kept the Foundation's books. The warehouse door was guarded by 2 men who had received written orders not to admit anyone before midnight. Father Daniel showed them the papal seal. The older guard unlocked the door. Inside were gray containers labeled candles, vestments, and maintenance supplies. Helen opened the first container. It held hundreds of wedding rings packed in clear plastic bags. Some were tied to prayer cards. One read, "For the room where no old man dies alone." Margaret covered her mouth. The gifts had not merely been counted. They had been separated by value. High-purity gold carried red tape. Lower-value pieces carried blue. Engraved objects were separated. Sister Elena stared at the system and whispered, they knew exactly what each one was. Father Daniel led them to a rear loading area. Months earlier, he had seen crates moved through that door after midnight. When he questioned the manifest, Kessler transferred him and called him unstable. Daniel had kept a copy of the security recording. On the screen, Kessler stood beside the truck while workers loaded 6 unmarked cases. Valenti appeared 10 minutes later. He did not touch the gold. He only checked his watch and signed the departure sheet. The Pope watched the video twice. Then he asked Sister Elena why she had left the foundation. She folded her hands inside her sleeves. "Because I asked where the widow's money went." "And what were you told?" "That numbers can become a form of disobedience when they embarrass powerful men." Margaret looked toward the bags of rings. "Did they sell all of it?" Elena shook her head. "No. That is what frightened me most." Beneath a work table, she found a narrow brass key taped behind a support beam. It opened a small records room no one had mentioned. Inside, the shelves were empty. But on the floor lay a single, torn ledger page. It listed 6 private shipments under a heading that did not belong to any charity program. Reserve casting. The final shipment was scheduled for midnight. Destination: the seaside residence. Pope Leo folded the page once. "The gold was not leaving the church," Helen said. "No," he answered. "It was leaving the poor." By late afternoon, the bishops believed the crisis could still be contained. They proposed postponing the blessing, blaming a supplier, and commissioning an internal review. Valenti repeated the same phrase. The gifts were handled according to procedure. Pope Leo XIV asked him to explain the words "reserve casting." Valenti said he had never seen them. Kessler said the phrase might refer to emergency assets held for future ministries. The Pope placed Margaret's ring on the table between them. Was her marriage an emergency asset? Kessler looked away. The search of the seaside residence began at 6 in the evening. The building was called a retreat house, but held no prayer rooms or pilgrim beds, only a private dining room, wine cellar, and sea terrace. Behind a paneled wall in the study, investigators found a steel door. The brass key from the warehouse opened it. Inside were 24 gold bars stamped with the seal of a private foundation. The bars belonged to a holding company controlled by relatives of Valenti and Kessler. Beside them sat cases of rings, medals, and family crosses too distinctive to melt safely. The bishops had not stolen anonymous metal. They had sorted through lives. Helen calculated the known value at slightly more than $15 million, excluding properties and vehicles. But the deepest wound was not found in the vault. It was found in a desk drawer. There, beneath conference menus and property invoices, lay the original donor book. Each name had a note beside it. Widow. Veteran. No surviving family. Unlikely to inquire. Margaret's name carried one more line. Trusted Kessler personally. The Pope asked her if she knew him before the campaign. She sat on the edge of a sofa, holding Thomas's ring in both hands. Kessler had been a young priest in Pittsburgh. He visited Thomas in the hospital, celebrated his funeral, and promised Margaret the church would remember him. 3 weeks later, he called about Golden Mercy. He said Thomas's ring could become part of a home for people who had no children to care for them, Margaret said. I thought Thomas would like that. She did not accuse him. That made the room feel worse. Maybe he meant it when he said it. Pope Leo answered gently. He may have meant it then. But he signed his name later. Sister Elena found another connection in the donor book. Thomas Hale had once chaired a small parish fund that helped Kessler finish seminary after his father lost his job. Thomas never told Margaret because he did not want the young man to feel indebted. Kessler had not robbed a stranger. He had taken the wedding ring of the man who helped make his priesthood possible. The Pope asked that Kessler be brought to the residence. When he arrived, he saw the donor book open to Thomas's name. His composure failed for the first time. He reached for his glasses and missed them. "I did not choose individual donors," he said. "The campaign became larger than any one of us." Pope Leo pointed to the note. "Trusted Kessler personally." "Who wrote that?" Kessler's lips moved, but no sound came. Valenti stepped in. "This has gone far enough. Public exposure will injure every honest ministry connected to the Church." The Pope turned toward him. "What injured them?" "The scandal." "No. The theft." Valenti warned that public confrontation would destroy confidence and humiliate the Church. Pope Leo did not raise his voice. Confidence built on a widow's silence deserves to be destroyed. The midnight truck was still waiting at the warehouse. Its driver had been told the delay was temporary. The Pope looked at the clock. There were 4 hours left. He ordered the gold bars, donor book, and unopened cases moved to the hall where the blessing had been scheduled. Then he gave a second instruction. "Bring every bishop who signed the campaign records." Kessler asked what the Pope intended to do. Pope Leo placed Thomas's ring back into Margaret's palm. "Something private apologies cannot repair." The hall was full again before 10 that night. There was no choir. No gold cloth covered the altar. The unfinished brass tabernacle remained where it had stood that morning, its false surface shining under the lights. In front of it were the 24 gold bars. Beside them sat the donor book. Margaret was not placed in the second row this time. Pope Leo XIV moved her chair to the center of the front row. The bishops entered together. Some knew nothing. Others had signed without asking. Valenti and Kessler had directed the operation. The Pope did not begin with an accusation. He asked for the names of the 7 hospices. Valenti read them from a prepared page. After each name, Helen Brooks stated what investigators had found. An empty lot. A locked storefront. A project cancelled before construction. A 6-bed facility used in campaign photographs, but given no money. With every answer, Valenti's page lowered a little farther. Then the Pope asked Margaret to stand. She tried, but her knee caught against the chair. Kessler instinctively stepped forward to help her. She flinched. He stopped as though a door had closed in front of him. Pope Leo picked up Thomas's ring. "Bishop Kessler, who gave you this?" Kessler said nothing. "Who gave you this?" "Margaret Hale." "No. She trusted it to you." "Who gave you the life that made it sacred?" Kessler looked at Margaret. "Thomas." The Pope opened the donor book. "And what did Thomas once give you?" Kessler's face lost its color. "A chance." The room became still. Pope Leo asked Margaret what she had wanted when she donated the ring. Her answer was barely louder than breath. A room where someone old would not die alone. That was the moment the defense collapsed. Not under a financial chart. Not under a legal threat. Under one small request. Valenti tried once more. The assets can be restored through a confidential settlement. Pope Leo looked at the false tabernacle. Was her humiliation confidential? Valenti did not answer. "Then neither will the restoration be." The Pope announced that all identifiable heirlooms would be returned to their families whenever possible. No family would be asked to prove grief through impossible paperwork. Independent advocates would help locate donors and heirs. The unidentifiable gold would be sold under outside supervision. Every dollar would fund real beds, real kitchens, and real homes for elderly people. The seaside residents would no longer host private dinners. It would become the first Golden Mercy home, with 40 rooms for widows, abandoned seniors, and retired church workers living below the poverty line. The private dining room would become a public kitchen. The wine cellar would be cleared and converted into a medical clinic. The bishop's luxury vehicles would be sold to finance transportation for residents who could no longer drive. Then, Pope Leo did what no one expected. He removed the gold cross from his own chest. The cross had been given to him at the beginning of his ministry. It was simple by Vatican standards, but valuable enough to pay for months of nursing care. He laid it beside the gold bars. No one who asks the faithful to sacrifice may stand outside the sacrifice. A secretary leaned toward him and whispered that the cross was a papal gift and did not belong to the foundation. "That is why I can give it freely," he replied. He ordered it sold first. Not because his cross was guilty. Because leadership could not demand restitution while protecting its own comfort. Then he turned to the brass tabernacle. It had never been consecrated. He ordered its gold covering removed and sold with the rest. A plain wooden tabernacle made by retired craftsmen would stand in its place until every promised hospice bed had been built. Valenti stared at the gold bars. "You would strip this chapel before the world?" Pope Leo answered, "Better a poor chapel with clean hands than a golden room built from widows." The bishops responsible for the scheme were suspended immediately. Their access to church funds was removed. The evidence would be delivered to civil authorities because repentance did not erase accountability. But the Pope did not end with punishment. He gave Kessler one final duty. The bishop had to read the names of the donors marked unlikely to inquire. At first, his voice was formal. Then he reached the names of 2 veterans who had donated their medals. His words slowed. He read the name of a nun who had given the ring of her deceased sister. He read the name of a widower who had mailed the last gold tooth from his wife's dental bridge, because it was the only valuable thing left in their apartment. Then he reached Thomas Hale. Kessler could not continue. Margaret stood again. This time, she did not flinch when he came near. She held out the ring. For one confused moment, he thought she was returning it to him. Instead, she said, "Read his name correctly." Kessler looked down. Thomas Edward Hale. Husband. Veteran. Parish volunteer. He helped pay for my seminary. His voice broke on the final word. Margaret closed her fingers around the ring. "I did not want revenge," she said. "I wanted you to remember him." Pope Leo moved her chair from the front row to the space beside the donor book. Then he asked that every recovered personal object be carried past her before leaving the hall. Not as treasure, as lives returning home. The first tray held wedding bands. The second held medals. The third held small crosses worn smooth by decades of prayer. The bishops watched in silence as each tray passed the woman they had expected never to ask questions. At midnight, the truck left the warehouse. But it carried no gold to the seaside residents. It carried folding beds, blankets, and medical supplies. The building was being opened that very night to 12 elderly women displaced by a winter apartment fire. Margaret rode in the first van. Pope Leo rode beside her. 3 months later, the former retreat house no longer smelled of polished wood and expensive wine. It smelled of coffee, laundry soap, and bread. 40 rooms had been prepared. The first hospice wing carried the names of Sister Agnes and Thomas Hale. Margaret kept Thomas's ring on the black ribbon around her neck. She never wore it on her finger. She said that place still belonged to him. In the chapel stood a plain wooden tabernacle made by 3 retired carpenters. Above it was an empty hook where the papal gold cross might once have hung. Pope Leo XIV had asked that the hook remain empty until the last stolen gift was returned or transformed into mercy. On Margaret's first evening there, she sat beside a woman who had arrived with 1 suitcase and no family. When the woman apologized for taking too long to stand, Margaret held out her hand. "There is no hurry here." The ring touched the wooden arm of the chair with a small, clear sound. It was not the sound of gold. It was the sound of something sacred finally being where it belonged.